Teresa and Naomi, I am so excited to have you guys on the podcast with me. Both of you, this is a very special moment.
Yeah, I'm excited. It is.
Let me tell you a little bit to you guys. I want you to know why this is such a special moment for me. These are some of those full circle moments, right? As kind of a founder and visionary of any kind of organization or movement, you see way out in the distance, man, I wonder if God could or would do something out of this, holy discontent that you have. And a couple of years ago, Ken Roberts and I, who's our coaching director, you guys are familiar with Ken, we started having this idea of what if we began to certify coaches, or what we call certified guides, to help people, because he was coaching, I was coaching, Christy was coaching. We didn't have the capacity or bandwidth to be able to coach everybody that was coming forward. And so it started as a seed of an idea. And then over the course of 2020, we developed all of this stuff. And now we're sitting here and we're about to have a conversation where you guys are going to open up the hood on your certified guide experience. Naomi, you working with Teresa, and we're going to get to hear what God has done in your life through this process. And this is just one of those full circle moments that it's so excited for our listeners to be able to hear. One, because your story is amazing, Naomi. It's amazing the way that God has worked in your life. But also, I just feel so humbled that we get to be a part of it. And just really proud of you, Teresa, for how you've walked through all of this. And so we're going to dive in. I want the listener to be able to hear and just absorb all of this, because I think this is just going to be a very special conversation. And so, Naomi, why don't you do this? Why don't you begin? I want you to kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself now. And then I want you to go back and start telling some of your story prior to Nothing Is Wasted intersecting your life.
Okay, thanks so much for having me. I think it's such a privilege. I'm a 64-year-old pastor's wife, mom of 4 great adult kids, and I have 14 grandchildren with one on the way. We live in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. That's a south suburb of Milwaukee. I'm a retired music teacher who now has more time to spend with my grandkids. So I'm excited about that. I've enjoyed teaching women's Bible studies and speaking at women's events, but currently I'm getting some much needed time to do what I really love, and that's writing. So that's a little bit about myself. My story, I grew up in a pastor's home where my parents were very busy building a new church. With a small church salary, my mom worked long hours, and my dad was always working a second job to support his 6 kids. While they were working, we took care of ourselves. Back in the 60s, you just kind of did that. So at the age of 10, I began spending time with my little girlfriend, and together we were invited to her next door neighbor's home, a widower in his 60s. We were always excited to go there because he started off by always giving us a bowl of ice cream, and that was just a fun thing to have. But it quickly became apparent that this widower had other intentions than just giving us ice cream. He was a master at grooming little girls, and soon we fell victim to his games. One day he sent my friend home, leaving me there all alone with him. I had no control over what happened next. I was horribly molested, and I was made to feel as if it were my fault. As soon as I could get away, I remember running as fast as my little legs could take me from his home. I ran so fast, I shook, I cried, feeling the worst shame and pain a little girl should ever have to feel. But I absorbed all of that to be my fault. And after all, didn't I deserve that? I went to his home willingly. So I felt like this was my fault. I was such a bad child. I felt so shamed that I didn't tell my parents, and especially my dad, fearing that I would get punished severely. He wouldn't have punished me. He probably would have gone and beat up the guy or whatever. But that was my little 10-year-old self believing that. So shortly after the physical violation, I soon began to be spiritually violated. So the physical and the spiritual violation just kind of ran together in ugly colors. So a visiting evangelist came to our church who had a deliverance ministry. So this is when my dad became immersed in the subject of demonology. The belief was behind every bush, behind every sin action and reaction was the name of a demon. The demons were named liar, thief, disobedient to parents. You get the idea. Any sin from a little child, they would say that is a demon, actually. So over my dad's zealousness to teach his congregation how they could get free from sin, he actually took this to a dangerous level when he began to experiment with casting out demons with me. I became my father's guinea pig at the age, I think I was between 10 and 11. He would take me to these house prayer meetings where I was seated on a chair in the middle of their gathering. He would then proceed to ask, is liar in there? Is thief in there, or disobedient, you didn't answer right to your mother. So is that demon in there? Well, I definitely didn't hear any voices, but in order to get out of that chair, I would say what he wanted me to say. So I would kind of change my voice. It was just really creepy. And this was just really impacting me horribly as a little child. So when I would finally get out of the chair, I felt the same physical sickness that I felt after the molestation. And if these episodes of spiritual abuse weren't bad enough, for many years to come, my experience in the chair, along with my name, would be brought before the congregation as a sermon illustration. I would just cringe when my name was mentioned from the pulpit in front of my peers. And this went on well into my teen years, 15, 16, 17. And I just wanted to crawl under the pew. It was awful. I believe this is when I began living a life of secret self-loathing and being vulnerable to unhealthy people. Soon my communication skills were one of two things. I would either cower and say what people wanted to hear so that I could leave and get out of the chair, so to speak, Or on the other end of the pendulum, I would over communicate and I would want to control in order to be understood. So I took these learned behaviors into my adulthood. And after marrying my high school sweetheart, we graduated together from Baptist Bible College. And then we went right into full-time vocational ministry. We were so young and ignorant about boundaries for our family and what healthy ministry should look like. They didn't teach you that in your college classes. So consequently, we were involved with some unhealthy leadership, and that was difficult to navigate for me. When you have any unaddressed trauma in your life, serving in church ministry will pull it right out of you, and it did. For me, the more difficult situations were serving under insecure leaders because we didn't have those boundaries set up around us, right? We were so ignorant. So anyway, when your childhood abusers are men who've made grave decisions to your detriment, it is very hard to respect decisions from those that would control without reason or squelch thriving ministry opportunities that you're a part of. And, if you've experienced childhood trauma at the hands of men when you're little, I don't know, I've been told that you have these, a second sense of red flags with men who lack integrity. So, my red flags were always there. Yeah. So more and more, I found myself dealing with emotions that would try to surface. And I like what Terry Wardell calls them, unrepaired emotional ruptures or leakages, triggers. I was leaking all over the place. But I didn't have any explanation for these. I didn't even know what a trigger was, the true meaning of it, until I met with Teresa the first time. So with all these unrepaired emotional ruptures, I would feel guilty, and then I would confess the sin of a wrong response, and then I would go on with life. And that would be a normal cycle for me. It wasn't that I didn't deal with some of the past at certain times in my life. I just never, and no one helped me address the real trauma that was buried deep inside that would just leak out here and there. So I would then cycle in and out of depression. And sadly, there were 2 attempts at suicide when the pain was so unbearable. I would recover. I would make sure no one in the church knew, and then pull myself up by my bootstraps, which is an impossible feat. And I would go on thinking no one was the wiser, right? So I had a few ineffective counselors that would address the presenting trauma and not get to the real trauma. I've had counselors give Bible verses to memorize. I've had counselors who dealt with cognitive behavior. Every one of those past counselors missed it, including a well-paid psychiatrist. They all left me feeling stuck. So life went on. Life kept moving, children, work, ministry, and in all of that living, I had never stopped long enough to understand that my emotional responses to certain events were actually triggers that were tied to my 10-year-old abuses and the unhealthy ministry involvements. So that brings me to what happened at the end of last year. I wholeheartedly believe that after being heavily involved in a fruitful season of ministry in 2020, Satan wasted no time in orchestrating the most bizarre meeting I had ever been in since I had sat in the chair of shame when demons were called up. When I walked through that door and sat down for this meeting, I soon realized that I was being placed in another chair of shame. And all my life, I had always said, oh, I'm in the chair of shame, or I don't know why that kept coming up in me. But I would say, I'm so shameful. And that was my identity. I wore it like a dirty pair of socks that I would take on and take off. But when I was being placed in that chair, all the old familiar feelings of violation and sickness overwhelmed me, paralyzing me so much that I couldn't do what I should have done. And that would have been to stand up, say, this is very unbiblical, very untruthful, and walk out with strength and dignity. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. That meeting was so telling about my emotional well-being, because I found myself sitting there and cowering in fear. I was just paralyzed. I couldn't move out of my chair. So when I got home, I just thought, I can't live anymore. I'm just such a shameful person. This is awful. Days afterwards, I experienced panic attacks. I had never, in all the unhealth in my life, I had never experienced panic attacks. I thought I was having a heart attack in the middle of the night. I mean, I would do nonstop crying and just feel in utter despair. My husband, Mark, he is amazing. I mean, he is God's gift to me. Mark would hold me and pray over me and cry out to God to bring the most effective counseling into my life. Because at that point, in the middle of the night, when I am having a panic attack and just paralyzed in fear, fear just gripped me. I even said to him in the middle of the night, why don't you take me to a hospital? It was that bad. And I'm so thankful he said, no, we're going to pray for God to bring the best counseling into your life. So that night we prayed, and it was like, it was a Sunday. The next day, I believe it was a Monday, January 25th, I happened to randomly check my email and almost scrolled past an email from Nothing Is Wasted announcing their Pain to Purpose course. I've been an avid listener to your podcast since 2018 when my daughters Carissa and Ashley told me about it. So I thought, I've just listened to the podcast. I haven't subscribed to anything, but somehow you got me on your email list, or God's divine plan.
Wow.
So, so with nothing to lose, I entered the needed information to set up a Zoom chat with Ken Roberts. And I have to tell you, when I met with him, and I was telling him my story about my dad and different unhealthy leadership, he leaned in, and it was the first time a man said with compassion, can I just apologize for every man who has hurt you and left wounds? And I just began to cry. And that was God showing me that there are good shepherds. There are good people. God used Ken in a big way. And when he listened to my story, he was really in tune. And I don't think he really researched much. He just said, I know who I'm going to put you with. And he told me about Teresa Glantz. And when I got off, I want to say this, when we got off that call, and I looked into the prices and how much I needed and whatever, and I told Mark, and, we just didn't have the money at the time. And Mark looked at me and he said, we are going to trust God for this. You need all 11 sessions, not 5, not 7. You need 11. Yeah. And he wasn't saying that in a mean way, but he wanted to get the best care for me. And so by faith, we signed up. And 1 week later, we got a check for the amount. That doesn't happen to me. That happens to other people. And so that was just so cool. And then I started meeting with Teresa. And I'm so thankful for your ministry. This, we'll say more about it, but this is just an amazing counseling guide that took me from A to Z that no other counseling has ever done. So.
Wow. Naomi, I don't even know how to respond to all of that. Wow. On one hand, I'm so grateful for your willingness to be, your vulnerability, your willingness to be. It's a very tender moment just to hear you talk about the things that you experienced, and then to hear this moment that you had with Ken, where he leaned in and apologized on behalf of every man that you have had these kinds of adverse encounters with, and that you've been, objectified by and abused by. And man, sometimes you just hear things that it knocks you off your feet. And you don't know how to respond. And I hear story after story after story after story. But Naomi, just one, I'm struck by, even right now as you recount your story, I'm struck by the poise that you're able to recount that story with. And I know that has come with hours and hours and hours and months and even years of working through the trauma of what you have gone through. In a second, we'll talk about this idea of, a trauma narrative, because I know that's something that Teresa is really passionate about. But I would love to take a couple of moments to ask a few questions about some of these things, that you experienced. A lot of folks that experience trauma at an early age, they kind of live with this this false belief that this is normal. This is what everybody else is experiencing, and I'm just having a tough time grappling with the realities of life. And so I just kind of need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I need to deal with this, because I guess what I'm experiencing right here is kind of every child's normal experience, when in fact it's very much not the normal experience, but this is the false belief that we live with. Would you say that right there, what I just described, was true as you grew up, in your childhood, that some of this, kind of this seed of shame and the casting out of demons, was there something in your mind that was saying, oh, I guess this is kind of normal for pastors' kids. I guess this is kind of normal. And if so, when did it begin to shift for you and go, wait, something's not right. Like this can't be normal.
Yes, you're right. I think as a child, something's wrong. You were shamed, you were violated, but, and I knew the thing with the widower, that was definitely not normal. Yeah. And that was horrible. But what my dad did, my dad was always a zealous pastor and father. And, I do want to say, I know he loves me and I loved him. He went to heaven 6 years ago. I'm learning the button and he hurt me, he abused me. But to your question, I did think that was kind of normal in our church because he normalized it, and it was funny. He only did that with me and my brother. When I've talked to my sisters, I've got 4 older sisters, and they never had to sit in a seat and have demons called out of them. So, it makes me wonder, how the victimized child gets that. And so did my brother. We endured a lot of that unhealth. So to a point, it was normal. But in my teens, I began feeling resentment. And then it was playing out in those emotional leakages, ruptures, in my married life. And then toward those in authority, I would question more. So either I would cower or question, but that second question is a little harder because I can't pinpoint. But I know that, just this last February when I started counseling, then it became like, oh, this was really horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, Teresa, you can speak into that, right? With I write, and I sent her a manuscript of when I wrote in 2009 when I first tried to overdose. And I talked about this demonology a little bit, but I gave my dad a lot of credit and stuff. And she said, Naomi, you're not seeing how bad that was to be done to you. Can you explain that better?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it comes down to, I think we do this a lot, is we try to minimize our trauma. It's too hard sometimes to really absorb everything that happened and to be honest about it. So instead we minimize it. And you say it great in Pain to Purpose, if we can't name it, we can't heal it. Yes. And Naomi really struggled to say, I think it was abuse. And, as a coach, you can't come in and just go, it was abuse. Like, you kind of have to lead her there slowly, and eventually she gets it herself. Right. But, and again, it's not about saying her dad was bad.
Right.
He was trying to help and use Naomi in the midst of that. And it became abusive, and it became very wounding for her. So helping her to see that was really my goal. And then when I read this manuscript she wrote, it was just all over. She was not willing to name in that what happened to her was not appropriate.
Yeah. That seems to be the case with spiritual abuse. It seems to be very blurred, Mm-hmm. All abuse kind of lives on a spectrum. However, it is a lot easier to identify, where, in many cases with sexual abuse or physical abuse or, emotional abuse, even, where it crossed over into inappropriate and on even down the spectrum to, just horrific. Right. But spiritual abuse, kind of that line seems to be gray so much. And, it's something that is emerging in the conversation a lot right now. It's bringing to the forefront there is another abuse out here that lives within the church, and it's masked, it's cloaked in this spirituality, and sounds like that might have been a little bit of why it was so difficult for you to identify this is abuse, this is not right.
You're right, and there's something else in the very first chapter or the first waypoint when you have the emotion wheel of feelings wheel.
Yeah,
is that
the
what
feelings
you say?
Wheel.
Yes. I saw how deficient I was in being able to name my emotions. That wheel helped me tremendously. I had to look at it. I had to get words for what I was feeling. So, and then I was from a very fundamental, more legalist background. So that played into the guilt, the shame. And so it was always me, and I couldn't get better, you know? So.
Yeah. Whew, wow. Did you notice at any point, prior to getting connected with Teresa, were there some pockets where you saw the Lord kind of give you a glimmer of hope or show up in any way? I think sometimes we can hear other people's stories and think that, and we can go, I'm sitting here going like, God, where were you in all of this? Did you notice some places in your life and during these really traumatic moments or traumatic times that God seemed to reveal himself to you, but maybe it was difficult to kind of grasp hold of, or maybe it was difficult to really like live in the truthful reality of who God has, called you to be and how he's created you?
Yes, I think there were. I mean, God is so good, even though, we're not getting thorough and right healing. Along the way, there were positive things in ministry. God doesn't waste any of our experience, obviously. And so I can take away from each ministry experience good, and where we were either able to impact and be used of God, or how people impacted us and showed love and graciousness to us. I have to say that even though there were times of being able to, my bent is more toward women's ministries and teaching. And funny thing, I taught breaking free, and I couldn't get free. And I, was able to be into people's lives, women's lives, and try to be a blessing and all of that. But I have to tell you about the oasis in the middle of all of this was when God gave Mark and I an opportunity to do 2 years of a ministry opportunity in the Dominican Republic. Our children had just left home. We were empty nesters. Everybody was married. And we got this awesome opportunity to be in Santiago, Dominican Republic, and teach at this school, Santiago Christian School. And it was like an oasis. Like I was reading in the Psalm, is it Psalm 84, about the valley of Baca, where the children of Israel are walking through this valley, and they're on their way to Zion to worship, and they're weary, they're tired, they're thirsty, and God himself fills these wells with water. So they come to these wells, they gather, they get refreshing, they probably sit and rehearse under the shade tree, if there is one in the wilderness, about God's goodness. And then they move on, and they've had that refreshing. And as they're walking to Jerusalem, Zion, they're rehearsing God's goodness. And then he provided this. I believe in all my ministry experiences, it was hard because I was always trying to stuff down, the childhood trauma, didn't want it to come out. And so God opened up a well for me in the Dominican Republic, and it was so refreshing for 2 years. I had a wonderful missionary pastor who just was amazing, and we had ministries. I began a Bible study with the Dominican women in the school, the moms. We saw 20 women come to Christ in 2 years. And just the ministry opportunities, Mark and I, every weekend, we'd just jump on the Carib Tours bus and go to Sosua Beach and have a refreshing there and come back. And I just think God gave that to us right in the middle of, hard stuff. Yeah. And then when we came back, we had some more hard stuff until it brought me to this point.
You were talking about how much you were shoving down that childhood trauma. You didn't want it to, you didn't want to address it. You didn't want it to come out. I'm sure there were a lot of reasons why, of course, that you were shoving this down, but did some of it have to do with the fact that you were a pastor's wife? And
oh, yes.
You didn't think maybe those two things could coexist,
No. I needed to put on a good face. You know, I was teaching women how to live fruitful, victorious lives. And here's my wounded self. I would put all this energy into teaching, all my energy in teaching music classes at school. And then I would come home and I would lay on my bed and just stare at the ceiling, like all of that energy went out of me. I had nothing left, but I had to have that energy to put on a good face, you know. And at church, until now, it really wasn't talked about that you're going through depression or you're, you know, need to deal with childhood trauma or whatever it is. Yeah. So yes, I definitely stepped it to save face.
Wow. Well, so then, you know, you get connected with Teresa, and I'd love to spend some time kind of unpacking what your conversations were like. You know, obviously this was, weeks and weeks and weeks of unpacking this trauma and working together and stuff. But I wonder if you guys can hit some of these highlights, some of these moments as you guys were working together. You know, Teresa, what was your thoughts as you entered into this this working relationship with Naomi, and what were kind of some of the approaches that you decided to take in this situation? And what were some big like aha moments? You know, what were some big like really breakthrough type moments that you guys experienced?
Yeah, I'd love to. First, I'll say, like, you know, God in his sovereignty, right? I mean, he connects Naomi and I together. And I think Ken probably put us together because I'm a pastor's wife as well. Yeah. So it was a good fit, right? Yep. You know, when I get on a Zoom meeting with somebody, I have no idea what their story is going to be like. And so when Naomi came up on the screen and could barely speak because she was crying, boy, if I couldn't relate to that myself and understand, like, I've been where you are, like, I totally get it. As she started to share what we'll call her presenting trauma, the event that took place, that was the meeting, she was in the chair. Anybody who would hear that story outside of knowing her full story, my first thought was, okay, this is what happened right now, but I know it's connected to something that happened a long time ago, because her behavior and her response to that was so off the charts that I knew it really wasn't about this meeting. It was about something more.
And you're talking about the one later on in life that she was alluding to, this seat of shame moment. Yeah.
Yep. That's kind of her presenting trauma, right? And so as we began to work together and she started to share her story with me, I could totally, God just said, here it is, boom, right? Here's the connection we're seeing. And so my job is to lead her to that without saying, here it is, you know, just saying, you were in this abusive relationship. And so really, you know, gently being prayerful about how to walk her through that. As we worked together, I mean, we became great friends, like texting, and we're buddies now. I mean, we are great friends. I tell her all the time, if you lived by me, we'd be hanging out all the time. So it was just such a blessing. But, you know, I think some of the really great moments for me as I worked with her was, it wasn't like Naomi came to me and was saying, hey, can you help heal me, right? Naomi was saying, I am desperate to be healed. I know I did not understand how deep this went until she and I started working together. And so as we would go through a waypoint, she would send me an email or text me because she was actually making that waypoint experiential for herself. So let's just talk for a second, Naomi, about waypoint 3, which is the one about bitterness, right? And so we walked through that, and, you know, God's bringing up these things as we're kind of talking through in our session. And she texts me later and about something that happened. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about what happened in that.
Yeah. So we were talking about the forgiveness and the bitterness, and, boy, I wanted to get free so bad. I mean, I was used to hearing, if you do A, B, and C, you're done, you know, and so we're done, Teresa, right? So I did my lesson. I mean, when I would listen to your videos, Davey, I would literally, if it was a 40-minute video, it took me an hour and a half because I'd stop and write down all your good quotes. And you should see my book. It's a mess. But when I got off that Zoom call with our time together, I was just like, God, I want to be free. It didn't happen that same day, but the next day I felt such a heaviness and so stuck that I went into my living room. And this is a neat story that, I always said I'm in a chair of shame. Well, I went in my favorite stuffed chair in the living room, and I really met God there. I just opened my hands, closed my eyes, and begged God to reveal what needed to be revealed to me. I sat a long time in that moment, and I wrestled all the whys and the memories of the past. And then it was so neat. I mean, nobody told me this, but I experienced God guiding me first through emotions that I felt as a 10-year-old girl and running out the door after being physically violated. I felt all that shame and disgust. And I was like, it was God, but God was holding my hand through that. So I just wrestled all of that out. And then I sat with God longer, and he exposed lies that I believed about myself. And I asked God to reframe that and help me to lay it down. I was able to, feel those emotions enough to forgive. And I know forgiveness is a process, but that was the start. And I laid it all down. And I just sat there for the longest time with my eyes closed, my hands held out. I mean, snot was running down my nose. I needed to get up to get a Kleenex, but I didn't want to move because I didn't want to let go of God. I was just having such a neat experience with him. And I just felt God continue to guide me through a reframing of who I really was. And then this is the neat part. I saw God take away the chair of shame in my life. That was amazing. And I was able to see that God allowed the circumstance that happened at the end of 2020 to get me to this place. Satan he meant it for bad, but God meant it for good to release me completely from my past. And he gave me a reframing of what a chair looks like and his healing. And I just stayed there in that moment. And then something funny happened. I was like, okay, God, I want a new name. What is my new name? And I thought, okay, are you going to call me chosen, beloved? And I couldn't hear anything. And I was like, God, where are you? I need to hear a new name. And then I thought, okay, I'll close this and get up. And I opened my Bible and I opened to the book of Ruth. And I'm not one, just like with the money, I'm not one to believe in just open my Bible and there, poof, is the verse, right? And so I had begged God, give me a name. Instead, he gave me his name. And it was Ruth 4:14. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age.
Wow.
And I went, God, you've already given me a name. I'm your child, but you are a restorer and a redeemer of my life. And I was just so thankful. And the rest of the day, I just wanted to just stay in that moment and praise and thank him.
Now, okay. All right. Let me make a connection here for a second. Maybe I'm having an aha moment. That was in the book of Ruth right there. That was that stated over Naomi?
Yes.
Yes. That's amazing. And Naomi means sweet. So here the Lord. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was Mara.
Yes.
And then he redeemed
and
and gave
you sweet. Wow. Naomi. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, and he replaced this name shame with the name he gave you. With your original namesake, and that is sweet, man.
Exactly. And ever since then, I have not even mentioned that I'm shameful or feel that way. I mean, that I was really truly delivered from that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff as we work through a lot of the waypoints, I think one for me that was really impactful, I was going about my day. I can't remember what waypoint we had finished. And Naomi sent me a text, and she was at Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. And she had some pictures, and she said, I wanted to let you know I came out here to reclaim some time that I had with the Lord where I almost ended my life before I reached out to Pain to Purpose or to Nothing is Wasted. And while I didn't realize that she had went that far into depression, that she had went to Lake Michigan and actually considered walking out onto the ice until it collapsed and she would end her life. And so after going through one of the waypoints, she decided, I'm going to go back out there and reclaim that. And it was just a beautiful story of God's promise that, he will redeem the things that happen to us. And she got to actually go out there. And I love that she would make these waypoints into experiences. Yeah. Because it took those experiences to actually bring her to a place where she could fully heal. Yeah. It was just, we had some great, amazing moments like that.
Wow. Yeah, we talk about this a lot, that if we are experiencing trauma, right, an emotionally laden trauma or a relationally laden trauma requires us to experience healing. It requires that the Holy Spirit comes in or uses someone else for us to experience that relational healing, that emotional healing. It can't just be something that we know up here cognitively. It has to be something that, if we're going to talk about it in simplistic terms, that travels that 18 inches to our heart and ultimately into an experience where we know, right? We know in the depths of our soul the truths of God's word and the truths of who he is and the truths of who he has called us to be as his children. How would you say, Teresa, as you were working with Naomi, as you work with other people, how would you kind of qualify the interplay of all of that? You have, we also talk about in the midst of that, right, that God's really the healer. Jesus is the healer. He's the big T teacher. We talk about that in the Pain to Purpose course. He's the big G guide, but that we need other guides to walk beside us to kind of point that out, because we are too close to the situation emotionally. Yeah. We're too close to our own trauma. So where does all of that interplay? How do you, as you're approaching it, how do you kind of take up your role and then help them to see Jesus's role in all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the most important things we can do is, anyone that comes to me or any of the other guides, the first thing they have to do is really learn that they can trust us, right? Because trauma survivors usually don't trust people easily. I mean, Naomi's story is a great example of that. And so for she and I to be able to build a relationship and her to understand that she can trust me, that she can text me when there's something going on, and I will try my best to text her back. So really learning about trusting people. And then once I feel like I've gained her trust and I know that, I can begin to point out things that maybe she's missing. Have you ever thought about this? And try to connect some of those dots for her, because that's really what happens is we've minimized it so long, it's nearly impossible for us to see. Yeah. So we'll take the example of men, authority, pastors, right? We'll just take those three things that often played a role in some of the abuses that she had. Well, if we can kind of connect those and say, how is this showing up today in your life? And then she could see like, oh, I do struggle with that. Then that can be something that we're prayerful about when we're going through the sessions. She has a great example of what she would do with the ABCs of emotions. That's in waypoint 1 and 2. She would actually have an experience and then come home and map that out and say, okay, here's what happened. Here was the activating event, my core belief or my belief, and then the consequent emotion. Okay, let's do it again. And this time, let me see what was the wrong belief I had and how do I need to work on that? So again, made it very experiential. Right. I wasn't telling her to do that, but she was doing that. And I just kept seeing God, after session after session, like I was like, yay, clapping my hands. Like, this is awesome. So yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing when we allow God to be God in the situation, he shows up.
For
right?
sure.
And
For
we,
sure.
and when
yeah.
we just kind of are leading people, in that process and not trying to give people the answers necessarily, but just walking with them, asking questions, trying to point them back to really the truths of God's word, then the Lord shows up and he does the work that only he can do. And that's what's I think so powerful, Naomi, about your story is all these places that God just shows up for you in these different, times where you're sitting in your chair and you don't want to leave because you think maybe it's all gonna dissipate and it's gonna end right here. You want to continue to experience just this flood of God's grace right there. I think those are just such powerful moments to be able to truly experience that healing.
Absolutely. And it is God. And this is the first counseling guide program course that you encourage to experience God in the healing. That's where it's at. Yeah. And when I would experience God at different waypoints and he would show up and show me, here's an example. Just a couple weeks ago, I texted Teresa and said, I'm healed, but like Terry Wardell says, I'm being healed and I'm yet to be healed. Right. And so I said, I'm just really struggling. Some situation happened and I just, struggling with the leadership. She prayed for me. She gave me a guiding question that just kind of put me back on my heels. And so for a couple of days, I wrestled that out again. And because I had the tools with Pain to Purpose, that situation was resolved with the Lord, and the experience with God in just sitting with him in those moments. It didn't take the months with the other healing. It was like things came quicker. So a trigger would come. Here's one of the things that came to me last week was I don't know how this dream got in my head, but I could see my dad at the door of the perpetrator's house, and I'm standing behind the perpetrator. And I'm like, what are you doing here, Dad? And he says, we do anything we can to win someone to the Lord. And I mean, that's not what my dad would say, but I don't know what made it come up like that. Yeah. And so I asked God, I said, this is so troubling to me. I thought I was healed from this. I thought this was done, But there was this little layer that had to be, nipped in the bud. And so I spent time with God and he was able to show me as I wrestled it out. The vision I got in my head was my dad, the perpetrator, me, and God with his arms around me. And it was like, God, you were there. Yeah. You are my loving Father. You haven't left me. And I was able to lay that down much quicker. Wow. So the tools that have been provided and taught in this Pain to Purpose have been phenomenal. I use them all the time. And when I get triggered, then I have something to work with and I go on quicker,
Wow. Well, I'm curious as we kind of close our conversation, how you're beginning to discover that and step into the actual repurposing process. There's so much healing that's done, and it will continue to be done in your life as these new layers get revealed to you. But now you have the tools, as you said, to really address those things early. But as you begin to kind of ask God for a vision for, the next phase, next steps of your life, what is some of that purpose that's beginning to emerge?
Well, I think I'm learning how to live better in a healthier place. Yeah. But the amazing thing in repurposing all of that is I'm not going out and telling my story, right? But I have had no less than 6 women come to me, and these are all women from age 55 and older, and they're beginning to share their pain stories with me. And these are women who just keep cycling in. I mean, I have a 72-year-old friend who refers to herself as trailer trash. And I said, you don't do that. And so we began talking, and her story came out. So no less than 6 women have come to share their story with me. And I have such a burden to help, probably more so the older women that have been stuck for years like myself. So I know God has a timing for everything. And one of the things I wrestled with is, why did I have to wait till I was 64 to get free from this? I know, God, you could have brought this into my life earlier. But I think it's for such a time as this. Yeah. And I don't know all the reasons why, but I do see older women needing help. And that's where my heart is starting to go. Yeah. And then I'm doing a lot of writing in a healthy way. And I'm having Teresa read each chapter to make sure that it's still healthy.
Yeah, so that's good. She's a great writer. I love it. Like I read it, like I'm like, I can't wait to hear what happened to this person. You know, she's doing an amazing job. It's been an honor, honestly, to walk, that God would let me be and have a front seat to see her be healed. It's just been really amazing. Yeah. And I love it. It's been great.
That is so cool. Well, I can't get over the providential nature of God. You know, you said it earlier, Teresa, but, you know, of course, we have created some structure and some strategy around how we match people. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that we didn't go and recruit people into being a certified guide. God just brought those people. And so in his providence, he brought someone like you, Teresa, with your story and with your training, and then your interaction with the Pain to Purpose and with Nothing is Wasted. And God's used all that to fuel this ministry that you have. And then here comes Naomi, you know, and while you may be questioning, why did I have to wait until I was 64 but it is for a time such as this, where you could be matched with the absolute perfect person to walk you on this healing journey and point you to the healing power of the Holy Spirit. And so I can't get over, that's how God works. He has this, we call it the divine flow, this relational connection that he wants to create these webs around us that catch us in the midst of our pain. And so I'm proud of you, Teresa. I'm proud of you, Naomi.
Thank you.
It's such an honor to be able to just kind of share in this moment and hear your story and then broadcast this to so many people who are hurting, and you're giving people hope because of the way that you guys have walked through this together, each of your stories.
Thank you so much for your ministry and the time that you've put in writing the curriculum, and then your new Pain to Purpose devotional. That has been an extra aid tool in my life. So I'm just so appreciative, and I just love Teresa. I'm so thankful for her, and she has been the best coach ever.
That's awesome.
You're sweet. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a blessing for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate so much you guys spending some time with us and sharing so many deep personal moments of this journey with our listeners. I know that it's touching them. I know that it's impacting them. So thank you.
Thank you.